Today, we see if gamers got bored on the final frontier or took to the stars for an epic journey. Let's find out if anyone played Starfield. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am BD and this is Did Anyone Play, a series where we investigate, analyze, and determine the truth about how much gamers have actually played a game like Starfield. How do we do this? We use trophy and achievement milestones within games and then compare those results to an ever-growing database to evaluate and rank games compared to the rest of the industry. Using objective data and statistical comparisons, we can draw conclusions. We aren't reviewing the game in a traditional sense. Our goal is to provide analysis that can be better used to understand player preference while ignoring game sales and hype to ensure we see reality as it truly is. Please drop a like or a sub to the channel if you want more of these types of videos. We're just starting out, so anything you can do is very much appreciated, and a quick spoiler warning as we may be talking about some elements of late game progression. So let's find out if anyone actually played Starfield on Xbox and Steam. Remember that all percentages we'll be talking about here come from the total number of players that actually launched and or played the game, not bought the game. So these results are a full reflection on how players played Starfield. The first milestone that players will reach is called For All Into the Starfield. This milestone is achieved once a player first makes it into space for the first time. This will happen within the first 30 to 60 minutes in Starfield after the showdown on the landing pad after the early tutorial. So how many players made it to this very early first milestone in Starfield? On Xbox, 71.5% of players got to this first milestone, and for Steam it was 89.2%. So let's pause here to evaluate. Steam is off to a strong start. 10% of players didn't make it through the early tutorial section, but this is still way above average. For Xbox, it's a different story. Now we have to remember that this launched on Game Pass, so that factor may weigh heavily on the Xbox results, but nearly 30% of players on Xbox never got into space in a game called Starfield. Here's a quick look in graph form and I put up the database average. Steam is well above the average for Milestone 1 and that's good. Xbox is a bit below average. It's not awful, but it's not a strong start either. So what is Starfield? It's an action role-playing game where the player creates their own character and joins a group of space explorers who are investigating some mysterious artifacts. It has the expected Bethesda features like first or third-person gameplay, loads of side quests, and player choice in how they develop their character, and in the case of Starfield, over 1,000 planets to explore. It was developed and published by Bethesda. Starfield released on Xbox and Steam in September of 2023. The second milestone all players would likely reach is called One Small Step. This is awarded after a player joins the Constellation group. It happens once the player travels to New Atlantis and follows the main story markers to get the main story rolling. So for Steam, 79.2% of players made it this far, and Xbox is at 52.8%. Steam lost another 10% at this early stage, but still doing very well compared to the database average. Xbox, though, is another story again. So we have lost nearly 50% of players before they even experience a little of the story and understand anything about what's really going on in that regard. And it goes without saying, Xbox is trending below the average of the database here. It's always good to understand the competition a game was up against when it was launched. What was happening around September 6, 2023 in the gaming world? Well, titles like Baldur's Gate 3 on PlayStation, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon on all platforms, and NBA 2K24 on all platforms came out around this time. Looking at Google Trends here, we see that Starfield and Blue was very strong at the time of release, beating out the competition. So hype was strong for Starfield, and at least with the case of Baldur's Gate, so was the competition, but not on the same platform. We like to pick a mid-game milestone for our third marker. For Starfield, we chose the milestone called Elite. This is awarded after reaching character level 25 in the game. We decided to use this to try and catch players who might be skipping the main story but advancing their character in other ways. Both playstyles should be represented here. How many players are left at this point in the game? For Xbox, it is 19.5%, and for Steam, it's 39.7%. This is a steeper decline in players than at any previous point in the game, but Steam is still above average, just not as much as before. Starfield continues to fall further behind the average on Xbox and Game Pass. It appears we don't have a large group of players playing the game outside the story flow based on this data. So how did Starfield do with critics? Well, Metacritic for Xbox has it at an 83 out of 100. And for Steam, the reviews show mixed, recent and all-time, with over 95,000 reviews. So Metacritic is fairly strong, but Steam having mixed reviews is not the best. You can see that the major review outlets scored Starfield strongly with an average around 85. The reception was decent for the game overall. The most important milestone is our fourth one. This is for completing the main story and what we base our final ranking on. It definitely shows how many players finished the game and truly played Starfield. This milestone is called One Giant Leap, and it's awarded for completing the story, making a critical choice, and watching the final cutscene. Where does Starfield end up on the different platforms? On Xbox, 9.9% of players completed the game, and for Steam, 18.5% did just that. Let's pause here since we reached the end of the game. We want to check the percentage of players that quit each platform after making it through the first milestone but failing to reach game completion. Here, both platforms are doing worse than the database average. Xbox lost significantly more players than Steam for Starfield, but both are performing worse than the average for the industry. Finally, to get a feel for how the completionist treated this game, the rare milestone 5 chosen for Starfield is called Life Begets Life. This milestone can be achieved if the player can gather 500 organic resources. This includes resources off the plants, trees, and animals. For Xbox, we see that 0.5% of players reached this milestone, and for Steam, 1.4% of players did it. Now let's see the full picture. Here are the raw milestones for our platforms for Starfield, and we've also added the database averages for each milestone in gray for comparison purposes. Let's get into it. For Starfield, we see a split start to the game. On Steam, it's strong at milestone 1, but Xbox struggles to get players into space. Jumping to milestone 3, we see a very steep decline. We are seeing losses of players throughout the game, and that is indicated by the fairly consistent downward slope on this graph. It implies there is no single failure point in Starfield, but that players drift away and lose interest at different points over the course of the game. We do see the unfortunate Xbox Game Pass initial drop, but it's not as strong as others we've seen, so that's something. But at milestone 4, we see that both platforms are under the average and Starfield is struggling to keep players to the end. We see that Steam ultimately comes out best at milestone 5 compared to the Xbox. So this is our final tally for Starfield milestones. But now let's see how the game stacks up against all other games in our database and find out if anyone truly played Starfield. Remember that we use milestone 4 as our ranking target. Here are the results for each platform for milestone 4 once again. It's time to reveal the final score Starfield has in our database. Here we go. Steam is at a 4 out of 10 and Xbox is at a 1 out of 10. A ranking of below average for Steam in terms of players that truly played Starfield is a bit disappointing, but the real problem is Xbox, where hardly anyone played Starfield on that platform. For a flagship title and a new IP from a celebrated developer and publisher, these results, especially on Xbox, are pretty disappointing. So those are the scores, but let's see if we can tease out some other observations by looking at these results in different ways. It's time for the deep dive. Let's start with progressive player loss. Each milestone shows how many total players have stopped playing the game at that particular point. We see the early Xbox loss here, but by milestone 4, Steam is closing the gap a bit. Moving on, we can look at milestone player retention. This calculation only takes into account the player population loss as a percentage compared to the previous milestone. Xbox has large drops at the start, but milestone 2 doesn't improve much either. Milestone 3 is huge, where another 63% of the remaining player base drops off at Xbox. But at milestone 4, we can see that Steam actually loses more. This is a lot of loss throughout the various stages of the game. How about completionists? How did the rarest milestones shake out on different platforms? Well, here we see that Steam is taking 3/4 of the completionist pie, with Xbox taking up the rest. Finally, we check on early versus late game retention. When you read a chart like this, the best performers are further away from the center of the circle. Early game Steam is doing well and Xbox is struggling. For the end game, you can see that Steam comes back down towards Xbox, and that they're closer. Finally, for completionists, we see Steam maintains the lead over Xbox. Let's take one final look at all the platforms and their milestone 4 results, but this time we show the full percent rank within our database. This is to give you a detailed view of how the rankings played out. Use this data as you will. Let's wrap this up. So what are our major takeaways from all the data? Starfield came to gamers with huge hype and decent reviews. Gamers were excited for an epic space-centric role-playing game. Unfortunately, we've now seen that not as many gamers truly played Starfield as you would expect. Steam was the strongest platform, but even that was below average. And Starfield on Xbox was barely played by anyone compared to the rest of the industry. 30% of players never even made it into space on Xbox, which is crazy since this is a very short tutorial section to get to that point in the game. So even early game players that didn't have a monetary investment, aka Game Pass, seem to have opted out of playing quickly. Steam had a bit more of a hold, but most likely it's because they had paid for it. We also see that Starfield had player retention problems consistently throughout the course of the game. This is similar to what we saw in our Fallout 4 evaluation, where there was no singular point of failure where gamers quit playing, but a slow and sometimes not so slow flow of players losing interest in quitting the game. Finally, I really do need to touch on Game Pass. Did it hurt or help Starfield in the end? Well, the answer is likely both. Xbox boasted that over 12 million players have played Starfield. That's the kind of reach that Game Pass provides. It gives a lot of players that are subscribed the ability to download and play any game on the service. But when you see the Game Pass numbers, we can apply that around 50% of gamers never spent more than 1 hour in the game based on the achievement level. So you have a huge amount of players just trying it once and never picking it up again. That's great for a marketing number, but it's not great for the future hype for games coming from Bethesda potentially. Starfield is a bit of a sad story. A huge AAA release like this should be engaging players and delighting them with a universe that they can explore for countless hours. It has all the trappings of a classic Bethesda hit, but something about it never got off the launch pad with most gamers. Limited exploration, loading screens that never seem to stop, and perhaps a main story that failed to grab the imagination of gamers. It's a cautionary tale that can hopefully help inform developers to avoid the pitfalls, improve games, and keep players engaged all the way to the end. We believe this data can help inform better outcomes in the future, and perhaps even Bethesda can learn and improve for future releases. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all the YouTube support stuff. I'd love to read any comments you have down below. What conclusions did you all take from this data? And of course, feel free to suggest the next game we should look at to determine if anyone played it. Until then, take care of yourself and each other.